Good morning, everyone. I'm gonna give everybody about 3 to 4 more minutes so they can log in. If everyone can hear me, if you can just give me a thumbs up. If you can see my agenda, thumbs up. Thank you.
Oh, shoot.
Same thing. Yeah.
All right, and you ready? Okay, I will do it. Now you see what's all right here. See, I don't understand why you log in. I was just logging in as a guest. You have to log back in on that computer.
It should be still, I'm all in. Shouldn't.
Yeah, where your people, you gotta log back in. Right? Oh, just submit everybody.
Yeah.
Show gallery, I don't see them. Stop sharing on that. Oh, there. Okay. So why was he telling me that? Because I was just logging in like a visitor, like the rest of it. That's okay. Don't worry about it. Yeah, 1 minute. Don't worry about it. I was gonna try to help you admit people, but you can just give me an hour.
No, sorry.
Why couldn't you get all this together? That's weird. Make co-hosts go up near the fourth, right? Make one person. That's fine.
Let's make these nice first. Start.
You want me to start? Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning. We had a little technical difficulty, so we've been swapping around in different rooms this morning, trying to get the best volume. So hopefully you can hear me well this morning. Thank you, John. My name is Bertha Johnson. I am one of the deputy city managers at the city of Durham. We will be presenting to you all today. I have Simeon White, our grants manager, with us here today, as well as Carlos Hernandez in our city attorney's office with us today. So we have a very competent team pulled together today to make sure that we can answer all of your questions. One of the things, we had a session on Wednesday night, and one of the things that we realized at the end of the session is that some of the nonprofit organizations or participants did not understand their current status with the grant. And so unfortunately, some of them understood that current status at the end of the presentation once we went to the spreadsheet. So I want to start out with the spreadsheet today, which is posted on our website. This is the decision that City Council made on May 18th at a special meeting. And so if you want to pull up the spreadsheet, you can go to our ARP website. Spreadsheet is on the website. Look at it. Most of you probably already looked at it, right? So what I want to point out is that there are several columns here, and this spreadsheet started with column E, which was the staff recommendation. So the staff recommended to City Council that we fund all organizations that scored 24 or above. That is the staff recommendation. The city council decided to come up with their own way to fund the organizations, which is this column C. So when you see column C, yes, Carlos can put the, Simeon can put the link in the chat. When you look at column C, that is what city council approved. So please don't look at anything else. We put it out there for transparency. The staff recommendation, city council decided. So if you have a number in that yellow column, you can be funded up to 70% of that number. If you have a number in that column beside your organization name, you can be funded at up to 70% of that amount. And we will talk about how to get to the full funding. And then when you go to the bottom of the spreadsheet, this was the most, I think the most confusing to folks is, yes, highlight that. That section where it says defer to city, county, I can't even see the word, county consideration. There is no funding set aside from the city for these organizations. There is funding available, but it's not been set aside for these organizations. The council has decided that once the county goes through its process, and we will hear from our GM, Claudia Hager at the county doing the presentations, if the county wants to partner with the city on funding these organizations, at that time, we would potentially provide funding for those organizations. So I wanted to point that out to you up front. So as we go through the presentation, you know, you can have context around, you know, what your current status is with the city's funding. And I'll turn it over to Carlos. I keep saying Carlos, but I'm gonna turn it over to Simeon first for his presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, DCM Johnson. Again, my name is Simeon White. I'm the new grant manager for the city of Durham. I've been on board for about 4.5 months now. So I've been trying to get my things in order, try to get the paperwork and documents in order so I can pull you guys in and to make sure that we do this the proper way the first time and we won't have to come back and rework some things. I see some questions in the chat.
We can talk about that at the end of the Q&A.
I asked everyone to hold their questions to the end. We're gonna have a 30-minute question and answer session. Let us get through the presentation and the information that Carlos is gonna share with us, and then we'll go and answer. We have a whole question and answer sessions. You can ask all the questions that you please. This is just a presentation that I kind of put together to kind of help out. Most of this information is already on the webpage, but I also sent out this slide deck with the invitation to this orientation as well as the previous orientation that we had on Wednesday. Pretty much the timeline, we're gonna just go over a few things about American Rescue, final rule, timeline, applications and stuff, risk assessment forms, and then of course, again, like I said before, questions and comments. This is a slide that just to tell you about what is our American Rescue Plan Act 2021. Pretty much President Biden on March 11, 2021 provided U.S. cities and counties with $130.2 billion through December the 2024 year. Okay. Durham County was allocated $62,445,275. The city of Durham was allocated $51,888,733. What we really had to stop and relook at was the final rule by the Department of U.S. Treasury. They came up with this rule. The final rule is pretty much allows counties to use up to $10 million of ARPA recovery funds. All this is information that's on the website. Take time to kind of go over it to make sure that you understand it. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me and I'll try to get a clarity of the part that you don't understand. This is the initial timeline that we started out with. A lot of you guys started with Layla Peterson, and this is the initial timeline that we started with from the engagement part that she did from April to July, the review part from July to September. We're trying to do the allocation part on time in October, December area. And then we have the evaluation of January and beyond, where we do all the monitoring of most of these grants. This is an the applicant contract roadmap. This is just the process that we're going to go through with the city attorneys as well as the council to kind of make sure that the application is going through the process to get the contracts executed. We will be going through certain situations where we have to go through the drafting of the contract, the evaluation of the amendment changes, the contract signatures, as well as it has to go through the city council work session. And then once it goes through the work session, it has to go through the city council meeting. And then we can actually execute the contract. This right here is just pretty much, it tells you the eligibility use of the funds, where we're not gonna, the city of Durham is not really using all these areas. We picked out a few, and those are the ones that we're gonna go with. The county may be doing a little bit different, but you can save those questions for the county once we open up for questions and answers. These are the core categories that the plan is pretty much basically going after: the health and wellness section, the safe and stable housing section, the economic equity section, the community resiliency section. Pretty much you should know what section that you are. If we kind of recommend you to go to another section, we have already done that. We should have already given you back that feedback. This is the draft scorecard. With this scorecard, this is where we kind of use to kind of let the stakeholders and reviewers score your case. This is different sections of where points was added up. So this is something that was given to us by Treasury that we used to, well, we developed it with the help of with the risk assessments and stuff like that. So these are some of the documents that we use to kind of give you the score that you need. And these are the sections that we pretty much use as far as the guidance. The Treasury, the Federal Treasury gave us the census tract to use, and this is where we pulled up the section as far as the qualified census tract. As we go through the process of this whole grant process, at some point we will have to do an evaluation and data analysis section. And once we get to that, we will go over that information into greater detail. But we definitely will have to do evaluation and data analysis of the grant as we go forward. Again, the process moving forward, it just pretty much repeats itself: engagement, review, allocation, and evaluation. So at some time, we will have to go through each part of this, and we will sit down. I will have a one-on-one with pretty much each point of contact for each grant, and we sit down and discuss the contract and pretty much make sure that you are able to pretty much do the deliverables that you're stating that you can do. Now I will turn it over to Carlos, and Carlos will kind of discuss the eligibility determination document as I pull it up.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me? Great. So I'm Carlos Hernandez. I work at the City Attorney's Office here in Durham. So one of the things that the final rule did was really put a lot of emphasis on us and on all the nonprofits who are going to be receiving funding. This is federally funded, so normally there's a lot of homework to do when you're receiving federal funds, but ARPA is especially so. So first, what we have to do is evaluate your individual projects. You all are going to be evaluated, not just your projects, but also your organizations. And what the eligibility tables that Simeon's going to be sending you is going to do is it's going to document for us and for the federal government where your project falls. Now, there's two categories, big categories. There's public health, and the final rules gave us enumerated lists for each of these categories. And public health is the easiest, there's only 4. If most of you aren't going to fall under public health, I think there's a few organizations that do. And so if you are one of those organizations, if your project falls under public health, you would select one of these 4 categories. And then if you don't fall under one of those 4, but you believe you are public health, we'd ask you to do a written justification as to why you believe you're in that category. Now, this isn't, a lot of these requirements it's not the city of Durham just wanting to put more work on you. This is something that the federal government requires us to do, everything that we discuss from here on out. Now, most of you are going to fall under the second category, negative economic impact. When you're doing a project that is qualified under that, and I believe in Simeon's table, that's all of them but the red one, which was the public health that he showed you in his slides, you're going to be under negative economic impact. So they gave us an enumerated list that first you have to identify who your beneficiaries of your program are. And so if you scroll down a little bit, Simeon, you'll see that they've given us an enumerated list of negative economic impact and disproportionately negatively impacted. And you should fall under one of your beneficiaries should fall under one of these 2 categories.
Excuse me, Carlos, can you just clarify, go back for a second? You put that whole process moving forward cycle slide, or someone did. Where are we in that process?
We are in right now. This is the moving forward. This is going to be stage 1, where Simeon's going to be sending you this document that we're going over, these tables, and he's also going to be sending you the risk assessment, which we're going to get to next. We have to have documented in your file for anyone receiving grants, these forms. If we don't, now the consequences of us not following the federal government's guidelines to a T is that we only have to refund them 100% of every cent that we gave you. And you would have to refund the city so the city could refund them. So we want to avoid that, and we want to make sure that we comply with everything, that everything is well documented, not just for our sake, but for also your organization's sake. So we are, this process.
Thank you. Thank
no,
you.
No problem. So this process should be straightforward once you get the documents, but I wanted to go over it so that we're recording this. So when you guys are filling out your documents, you can always reference back to this orientation or Wednesdays. And I believe Simeon's going to be available for one-on-one tutoring, or not tutoring, but help in order to be able to fill out these documents as well. So when you fall under economic impacts, you're going to do your beneficiary analysis first. You're going to choose one of those boxes. If you don't choose one of those boxes, then you're going to be doing a written justification explaining why you believe your program will benefit someone who is economically impacted by COVID. And so that's the first part. The second part, when you're dealing with economic impacts, is you're going to be evaluating what kind of project yours falls under. And again, they gave us an enumerated list of categories. These are called the safe harbor. And you're going to check one of these boxes. Now, some of you might have programs that could, in theory, fall under more than one box. If that's the case, we'd ask that you please prioritize 1, 2, 3, 1 being the main category that you feel your project falls under, and then 2 and 3 being the others. If you don't fall under any of these, but you're related to one of them, then we would ask that you put in the written justification which one you feel you're most related to, and write out your written justification as to why you feel that your project qualifies under that one. So in the first step, this eligibility tables, we are looking at your individual project. We're not going into the organization yet. That's going to be the next step. And the last table that Simeon is going to send you is the allowable cost table. And this Word document has the links for the UG provisions that you can look up if you have any questions as to the specific allowable costs that are allowed. And it does have, whether or not it's necessary, you can say yes or no. And so we'd ask you to do that because this is just preliminary. This is not going to be something that's set in stone for you. What's set in stone is what's going to be in your contract with the city. That's where we'll get iron out the details of your budgets, but this will be a good guide for Simeon to be able to look at which costs you guys are estimating for your projects. So once you've done that, we're also going to be sending you a risk assessment, which will be a document that Simeon will be pulling up soon. Yeah, it's this document. The risk assessment is now going to be evaluating your individual organization. So some of you might have multiple projects. Some of you might not, but if you do have multiple projects, then there's only one risk assessment you need to do. If you have multiple projects that have been approved by the city, then you do 2 eligibility tables, 1 for each project, but only 1 risk assessment because this is your organization that we're going to be evaluating. Now, why do we have to do a risk assessment? Well, the federal government said that for our due diligence, we must, and again, must or shall, as they put it, do a risk assessment to determine the risk and the liability to the city that funds may or may not be misused or used and accounted for. So what are we looking for in the risk assessment? We're looking for organizational history with grants, whether it be city, state, federal. We're looking for institutional systems and policies in place that make sure that you have proper tracking of funding. We're looking for a history of auditing in terms of auditing for other types of grants. We're looking for staff changeover. Maybe that your organization has never done one of these federal grants before, but you've hired just a new head of finance that happens to be a federal guru on these programs. So it's pretty self-explanatory in the risk assessment. There's several questions. It's only, I believe, 2 pages long, so it's not going to be a lot, but we'd want you to be brief, but semi-thorough. So we want to kind of understand your answer to the question when you say, yes, we do have the capability of implementing said policy, and then you put it in there. You are allowed to add attachments. I'll leave it to Simeon how much he wants to receive, but you are allowed to add an attachment if you don't feel that you can fit it into one box. But the point of this is just to make sure that not only that we evaluate your organization in terms of low risk, medium risk, or high risk, but it's also for our documentation, because depending on where you fall under it, that our monitoring has to be tailored to the risk level that Simeon comes up with based off your questionnaire and your history. So a low risk organization is one that probably has done several federal grants. They've got seasoned staff. They've got policies and procedures in their organization that verifies constantly with the expenditures and what they received. They've done audits before, and they are accustomed to doing reports for monitoring's sake for the city. Those are low risk. High risk would be someone with no prior audits, are depending on the funding to be able to fund the majority of the staff who are going to be involved in the process, or maybe have had bad experiences in the past with city, state, or federal fundings and have had audits that have come back with findings. So you can expect your monitoring to be based off your risk assessment. So in the end, what Simeon's going to do is, once you filled out the 3 tables and your risk assessment, our priority is to be able to start getting funding out. It's really important that we get this money into the community. So we will be prioritizing those organizations that have clearly identified that their project is eligible and also are low risk, so we can get going on contracts as soon as possible. That's going to be our priority, is when we see someone who could, we could call it green is ready to go, we're going to reach out and try and get the contracting process as quickly as possible so we can get moving forward. And your contract, when we get to that point, that's when we'll negotiate and explain your monitoring, your budgets, your deliverables. Now, one thing I do have to state, and we stated in the last orientation as well, City Council has approved your project, not your organization. So what that means is, since this was a semi-competitive process, you can't switch out the program, unfortunately. So if you submitted a project and it's no longer viable, or you found funding from somewhere else, you can't say, well, we got approved for $700,000, so we're just gonna say that we're gonna do a new project and plug and chug. And so we're by law, we're not allowed to do that because this was a semi-competitive process. So we do have to stick with the project that you submitted originally. I know it's been a while, but we can't bait and switch on this process. So you will be submitting all the information based off the project that this council has approved. And I think that's pretty much it for the eligibility and risk assessment.
Thank you, Carlos. Now we will get to the question and answer session. Please feel free to raise your hand, put it in the chat box, and we'll go one by one. We'll start with the first question. John, you can unmute and ask the question.
Sure. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Carlos. On that last point of, just to clarify too, we submitted the project with a proposed budget and scope of work, and the council approved funding for it is 18% of the funding requested for the work. So am I to interpret your last statement correctly to say that if we can't do the full project for 18% of the money, then we're not eligible for the money? Is that?
No, that's no. So what you can't do is switch out, like unfortunately in your situation where you only had 18% of the money, it would be a scaling down of your project, but it would still be your project, and what you wanted to do is approved. So unfortunately you'd have to scale down your budget to the amount that you were approved. But it's not one of those that you're eliminated just because you can't do the exact amount that you wanted. It's just you'd have to scale it down.
That
What
was
we want to
that's
avoid
great.
we want to avoid is someone saying, well, we've been approved for 100,000 and we wanted $1 million. So instead, let's just put that 100,000 into doing some COVID testing and vaccinations.
Totally
And
different program.
switch programs. You can't, we're not allowed to do that. We have to, like I said, the programs were approved, the projects were approved, not necessarily the organization.
So that was my main kind of point into the question of how much latitude we have to alter the proposed work, just for not altering the nature of it, obviously, it sounds like, but significantly changing the scope of it to accommodate the reduced budget is going to be possible. Is that right?
John,
Yes.
Where did you get the 18% from?
Well, the original proposal that we submitted was $5.3 million. In column C, there's $1 million for this proposal. And now you're saying up to 70% of that is eligible. I think that's another question that'll come up though, whether that's 70%, but still, if it's just 1 million divided by 5.3, you got about 18-19%, right?
Yes, so John, in your original application, your 5 million, only 1 million of the 5 was eligible, and then you can get up to 70% of that 1 million. Yes.
Are you good with that, John?
I understand it.
Okay, all right. Yeah.
Understand it. Just need to understand it.
Understood, yeah. Okay, and when I give you the floor, could you please state your project name so we can go to look and know what you're talking about if you're talking directly about your project? I'm gonna go with Dr. Wanda Broom. You're next.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Simeon, I want to thank you so much for the emails that you've been sending. That was awesome. And our project is Community Healing Collaborative. It may be under Hub. Community, and we are in the, we can apply. So we're not a currently funded application. You see it?
Okay.
Okay. So what I wanted to say was that way in the beginning of this process, I sent an email to update the amount that we wanted. I've done that several times and sent it up to the ARP Gmail as ARP email as well, and it hasn't been done. So it's 5 million. The 23 was over 3 years, and I think that was also explained. So the amount that we will reapply for, that I hope is updated, is 5.1 million, which is over 5 organizations. That should be in your emails and all that information. So I wanted to make sure that that's accurately identified, because 23 million was over a 3-year period. So that's all I have.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Let's go with Miss Carrie Brock.
Hi, Simeon, great to connect. Thanks for the phone call last week, and thank all of you for the work you're doing on this. And I know Simeon was sharing with me last week that not a ton has been done in conjunction with the county yet, but just with with Deputy Manager Johnson and Carlos on the line, I wonder if you have any information about where the process with the county stands for projects that have been recommended for funding by the county and not the city, and any steps that as organizations we need to be taking on our end at this point to help facilitate that process or answer questions or provide information. Thank you.
Carrie, we have the right person on the call to answer that question, the General Manager of Durham County, who provides oversight of the ARPA program for Durham County, Claudia Hager.
Good morning, everyone. Trust that you're well. I am going to give you some overview about our process. We will also update our board with some highlights on Monday night, which will give additional information. The list that council recommended that the board consider funding jointly, it has been passed along to the county. Something that Mr. Hernandez talked about earlier was the uniform grant guidelines, and those guidelines are pretty strict in process wise. If there are 10 steps you must follow, if you do 9.5, doesn't matter. You didn't do all 10 correct, and so with that, you would not be able to cover that expense with the ARPA dollars. So process wise, I just wanted to point that out as we talk about how our process works and why and how we're doing ours. The list was recommended. The board decided to, prior to this list being recommended, they had already adopted a framework for how we would allocate dollars in certain categories. And that was done in May. That information, if you go to our agenda item for Monday's session, you will see that the document. But basically,
Can you please put that in the chat, a link to that for all of us in the chat, please?
We will, yeah, yes, ma'am. So the board is moving forward with additional RFPs in categories that align with our strategic plan. And over the next several months, we will have phases of them. The first phase of a large cycle of RFPs, because we've had additional RFPs already. For instance, for dollars to support digital equity efforts as it relates to internet service providers supporting broadband expansion in the northern part of the county. The board has worked on this effort for probably 3 years or more. 3 years ago, we tried to get ISPs, to internet service providers, to bid on some engineering assessments to determine what we needed to invest. They weren't as interested because those are very costly projects. And so Now that the state and the feds have put an infusion of dollars, timing wise, it was perfect. So although we did some work, this has always been a high priority. And based on efforts at other communities, we've set aside about $10 million to support those efforts. That RFP went out back a couple of months ago, and we will close that RFP in August. Timing wise, that delay was based on the state's allocation. And here we go to the rules that Mr. Hernandez talked about. The state is allocating dollars to ISPs, internet service providers. The rules with those dollars are, if the county has identified or a municipality has identified an ISP, then they are not eligible for the current wave of state dollars. So timing wise, we have been moving or kicking the can as to when we actually open or close our bids so that we can leverage those state dollars. And so a lot of this I know has been frustrating to the public and citizens, but this has been the most transformative amount of money that the nation has seen for infrastructure development. And both the feds, the states, and local governments are developing rules as well as allocating dollars at the same time. So sequence-wise, we've tried to align timing of dollars and when we've done things to make sure that we leverage federal and state dollars first. So that sort of speaks to the timing on that one. I won't go into all of the other ones as in much details. We've also we did an RFP related to housing security for some of our non-congregate housing needs. And that was to continue efforts for families that were displaced and were in a state of homelessness. And so that's a continuation of activities that we did fund formally with FEMA, but now are using the ARPA dollars to support that. Now, as I shared, the board did approve categories in which we're funding. As you can imagine, we are a human services based in what we do. So there are dollars that would support human services activity, whether it's performed by the county, or if we seek out nonprofit partners to help us with that. We will follow the same nonprofit process that we do for other activities, which include a lot of the steps that Mr. Hernandez said earlier about risk assessments, evaluating capacity. If an entity has not managed dollar amounts materially higher than their current budget, that would be a place that we will look at a little bit more carefully as we evaluate what we fund and what we are not able to fund. I won't go into all of those things, but we will model a lot of our practices based on our current nonprofit allocation process. So a nonprofit has to be in existence for at least 2 years. We have to have their audited financial statements. If they have a fiscal agent, we can definitely work with them, but there's a rigor with that, because at the end of the day, we're trying to make sure that from the county perspective, we are covering ourselves. Now, I know there were some questions yesterday about capacity and helping entities with their management, because they're all small. There are some nonprofits that may not have dealt in this space as long and may not have the infrastructure. And so as staff, we recommended to the board that we also set aside a pool of dollars, about 13 million, that could support projects that are priorities for the board. The board's had priorities as it relates to affordable housing, addressing homelessness issues, which is a subset also of how we look at housing, dollars for crime interventions, as well as for child care support, which ticks many different boxes, and there are additional categories. So we do recognize that there may be situations where entities aren't able to meet all the thresholds that are required for federal dollars. And so we have another pot of dollars that we will allocate later, and which will also allow us to address additional needs, because sometimes timing wise, an organization may not have the years of experience, but they're doing great work. But just because of some of those risk assessments, they would not necessarily be eligible for us to place them on ARPA dollars. But our board, again, they recognize the great work that's happening. And as staff, that is something that we recommended. Timing wise, everything is happening at once. And so we're trying to move quickly, but we will pull a trigger with at least 8 categories of project areas that will happen in our RFP that starts on July 5th. We will evaluate where there are places that we can partner with the city. The city and the county have several partnerships on many different projects. And so our intent is to try to move as quickly on activities. And if you've followed county and city government, you'll see interlocal agreements on various activities, and we may partner with a nonprofit on various areas. So we are still fleshing out how we will handle all of the dollars. Again, can't reiterate enough our commitment to making sure that we help meet community demands and needs, but also in our forefront is that need for following the compliance guidelines, because they are so rigorous and they're so very strict. And so we will also, yeah, so that I'll close up there.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Hager. It's greatly appreciated. I wanted to get through some more questions. So I'm gonna jump to the chat right quick because it was. Kim, you wanted to know up to 70% requested amount, right? Not 70% of the amount in the highlighted column. And that is.
No,
That's
70% of what's in the column.
it's 70% of what's in the column. You're on mute.
Which column? The highlighted column or the original request column? Because the highlighted column indicates, especially even if you look at the total, that if you add all those up, that's the total amount that I thought the city was going to allocate at the 20 million mark. So my question is, under option C that's highlighted, is it 70% of that, or is it 70% of your original request? It looks like it's 70% of your original request, which is what is in the highlighted column.
Yes, that's correct.
So it's not 70%. So in our case, where it says 147,000, it's not 70% of that. The 147 is reflective of the 70% of the original request at 210,000.
That is correct.
Okay.
It's already been reduced.
It's pretty much it's already been reduced in the spreadsheet itself.
But one of the things we want to be careful about is that it's up to 70%.
Right. Up to, right. If everything goes well, it's up to.
That's correct.
Okay. Let's go back to the hands up, Isabel, because I see you have a question in the chat as well as your hand up. So if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you so much. And I'm Isabel Geffner, Durham, the City of Books. I work at Book Harvest. Simeon, thank you for all you're doing, and all of the administrative folks. I go back to the question about the county. It's a little confusing to me still. The projects that were not funded by the city that are in the second part of that list of projects, are those projects that the county itself is actively are those projects considered the projects the county is considering, or are they just like a whole separate thing and people are gonna have to reapply based on what the RFPs are?
That is correct.
What is correct?
It is correct that people will have to apply based on what the RFP criteria states.
Okay, so those proposals are lovely that they're there. The city's not going to fund them, and who knows if the county will fund them. People will have to reapply based on what the county releases on July 5th of those RFPs. Is that correct?
That is correct. And there will be additional waves of RFPs as well. I will say the framework for many are categories that the county will focus on, but the guidelines and what we had established is our process. That's where we are with that.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, you can go ahead.
I was gonna say, I'm guessing again, is it $62 million that the county has? And I may have that number kind of wrong, so forgive me if I don't have it exactly right. But you're saying that $10 million of that money's already been allocated to broadband. $13 million may be set aside for priorities that the board has, particularly helping smaller.
Yeah. Well, and so, that's a separate pot of dollars. Okay, so it's a $62 million. And in addition to the 62, staff recommended an additional 13. So it's 72 million.
And where does that extra $10 million come?
It's our fund balance reserves.
Oh, got it. So it's not the ARPA money. It's
No,
just
it is not the ARPA money, because our concern is this, and this happened with county departments or other entities. There may be great intentions. However, if all 10, and I gave the example earlier, if all 10 blocks aren't checked, we can't apply it. There is no, let me just try to see if they do it, because then it becomes a credibility issue with everything else you send through for evaluation.
Thank you so much for that
You're
clarification. I
And
appreciate
I
it.
wanted to clarify something on the city county funded projects. If you go back to look at the city council session, it's not finalized, but they did make a commentary and agree upon it among themselves that should funding be left over from this first round of those who were approved for up to 70%, the next list to pull from in terms of eligible projects is the joint recommended for joint city county funding. So you're not dead in the water with the city just yet, because if there's too many organizations that their projects are no longer valid, or they don't qualify, or don't need the money anymore, and there's money left over, the next list that we pull from in terms of projects will be from the joint city county list.
Thank you, Ms. Hager, and thank you, Carlos, as well. I'm gonna jump back over to the chat. So Drew Dahl, when will we know what data and evaluation will require? This comes down the road. We have to do the contracts. This is pretty much as we get everything done. Just wait. I'll work with you one-on-one with this stuff to try to make sure that all the documents and information that you've given is up to date and in the portal that we're trying to create to put this stuff in. Did I ask you a question? Doing contract negotiation, pretty much. Drew, is that okay? Did I ask you a question clearly? Okay, I'm gonna move over to the hands up, Miss Sherry.
Thank you, Simeon, and thanks Bertha and Claudia and Carlos for all that you're doing on this. I know it's a ton of work. Question. So I represent the Culture and Arts Invest to Restart. So this is a proposal that provides support to the entire arts and cultural sector, both arts organizations and artists. So we will be having sub-grantees Will you be telling us what data we have to track from our sub-grantees so that we can appropriately include that in the contracts and documentation processes that we do with them?
Yes.
So if you, if I could, legally speaking, if you guys have sub grants, you now become a pass-through entity, and you will be required to have them fill out the same documents we had you fill out. You'll have to do your own risk assessment, your own monitoring, you'll have to do as Claudia mentioned before, you're gonna have to do those 10 boxes and check every single box and make sure you do every single step. So you're gonna be putting on your organization a great responsibility, because all the hard work you just thanked us for doing, you're gonna have to do it as well as a pass-through entity.
Okay. Oh,
Sorry.
and that's all right. But my other question is, since the timing of the release of funds from the city is not likely to line up with the timing of release of funds from the county, will we need to run two separate processes with our arts groups? One that matches up with each, with the city's timing, and one that matches up with the county's timing?
Unfortunately, since you're dealing with two different pass-through entities, unless we were to fund them with an interlocal agreement, you would be doing two reportings, two monitorings, two everything.
But Sherry, in terms of the money being spent, it's the same for both, or 2026 is the spent date for both, for all ARPA funding.
Yeah. It has to be dedicated by December 31st, 2024 and spent by December 31st, 2026.
Now, I will also add on, as we refine priorities, for instance, that the county may have, if there are entities that are funded by the city and the county, we always try to make it as seamless as possible and would look at those areas as places for interlocal agreement. So it is sort of only one internal audit department that you're having to deal with instead of two. We don't want that for anybody. And so those are process efforts that, you know, we will commit to and have done along the way on other kinds of activities.
Okay, so we may be able to work together to have funding and process be consolidated.
Right, if it's determined that it is a priority of both places. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'm gonna jump back over to the chat box. Mr. James Davis, your question was enumerated the priority within the box or next to the box with the simple check mark in the box. That's all we ask. If it's enumerated, the priority, just check the box.
Okay, and I was referring to the form where there are a lot of different options, and the presenter said that you may fall within more than one of these options. We only ask you to prioritize those 1, 2, and 3. So again, are we just checking the box saying that we are within this particular category, and then we put the number of priority next to that, or are we using that box to enter in a number?
So I mean, the box is too small to enter in a number, but ideally you're going to fall under only one. But if your program, your
No,
project
scroll down to the negative.
yeah. If your project happens to be one that you feel falls into multiple, it's going to be a little, then you would, yes, right next to the box, put 1, 2, and 3, but you should just fall under like the UG, the Uniform Guidelines wants you to fall under 1. And we have to pick one as a city that we report to the federal government that your program falls under. But in case you feel that it might be more than one, we'd just like to know where you feel you best fall. And then
One is better. It's best to make one selection as opposed to making multiple selections.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm gonna jump back up to the hands, Miss Terry. You're on mute. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate your time and energy of everyone that's involved in setting this informational session together. So my question, and this is still, it's still a little confusing to me. We, Farmer Food Share, I'm sorry, I'm with Farmer Food Share here in Durham. We were not funded, but we were under the invite to reapply list. And we are a food hub that serves our community. And so my question was, because in listening to everyone, I'm getting a little more confused than I was before I started this, is that when do we reapply? Are we an organization that has, do we reapply to the county? Do we reapply to the city?
Can you,
Or
can you tell, hold on for a second? What was the name of your proposal?
it was, let me go back to the list. We had requested $500,000 to bring us back to pre-COVID levels. So we wanted.
I need to know the name of your proposal. At the beginning of the meeting, we asked folks to introduce themselves. Give us the name of the proposal so we can look at your proposal to make sure we're giving you the accurate information.
Okay, the name of our proposal was rebuilding capacity to pre-COVID levels. We're on the second page under the invite to be reapply.
Are you in the column where it says defer for joint city-county consideration?
The sheet that I had, that I got.
Yes, I see you. You are under the column the county manager just explained, and we explained that with the city has not allocated any funding for those in that category. They will be considered for joint funding when the county completes its process. If you want to apply for the county funding, you have to reapply, which is what the county manager said just a few minutes ago.
Okay.
You had a,
I'm still confused, I'm sorry. So we are being already considered, we don't have to reapply for county funding?
You do have to reapply, which is what the county manager said and what I just said.
Okay.
You do have to reapply in their process.
Okay, all right. We
So,
will do
and-
that.
And also,
Sorry.
go ahead.
And what I was gonna say, for an example, in the category for funding, I do know have this, I had some computer technology challenges and couldn't get my file open. But for instance, in our plan, we had an amount set aside related to food security that was in our fund balance allocation and not in ARPA, because we recognize there may be some entities that have the years of experience, and then there are others that to meet the federal guidelines, and then there may be others that are not. But again, that is a board priority, and we will be sending the RFP out, and everyone that applied through this process will also get a link to the information. So once it's launched, everyone that applied, I think there were over 75 or 80 applicants, I may be wrong. So everyone would still get the information, even if they were already funded by the city. We'll also send it to our usual listserv nonprofit applicants. And I believe Food Share may be one that we've funded in other situations as well. So you will definitely have the latest and the greatest information.
Okay, great. That was what I needed to know. Thank you.
In last session, Bertha made a great clarification point. When you're looking at that Excel spreadsheet, what you see with fund and invite to reapply, that was the staff recommendation. What's the yellow bar is what council decided. So if you were invite to reapply, but you're in that yellow bar of funding, you're in the funding category. If you're in the anything under consideration for city county joint funding, you're waiting pretty much and reapplying with the county, and then seeing what the city and county will do in the future. But if you're in the category and you see the yellow next to your project, you're funded. Or you've been selected to advance to the next step of funding, which is doing the tables and the risk assessment.
Okay, and where do I find that form again? Can you put that link to that form with that information? Because the link that was included is not with any
Yes,
yellow.
I went to our website and I thought it was the most up to date. It wasn't the same.
It is on the website. It's on the rescue plan website that we sent out to everyone to go to for additional information. That's the place we need you to go to because we keep putting information. We put information about the orientation and everything on that website also. The spreadsheet is on the website. So we can drop in the link again to the website.
That would be great. Thank you.
Oh, so we have another question for, is an audit required? That was not mentioned in the application process in the chat. So there's two different organizations that are requiring audits. Now, under the UG guidelines, you only have to do an audit if you receive in one fiscal year more than $750,000. That is true. But based off our risk assessment, the city is going to have its own requirements, and it's very possible that you might have to do an audit depending on your risk assessment every year as well. So there's the federal guidelines, and then there's the city covering ourselves. And so in most of our contracts, it's very common for us to require an organization or a contractor to have a CPA do an audit of their books and send us the report.
Thank you, Carlos. Carlos, if you could explain the UG provisions for Mr. Darity.
For Mr. Darity. What specifically?
You said, what are the UG provisions?
Oh, UG provision. So that's a uniform guidance, guidelines that the federal government posts, and it's part of the federal law that whenever you're dealing with any federal funding, you have to abide. It's just a set of rules and regulations that anyone who is either a pass-through entity like us, who's getting the money and giving to someone else, or a sub-recipient, which will be most of you, with the exception of somebody who's also going to be a pass-through entity. Most of you guys are going to be sub-recipients. It gives the guidelines that we have to follow and you have to follow. And so we put links in there in the cost tables so you guys can read the guideline that specifically talks about each type of cost. But that's something that is any federal program. You can be talking about home, you could be HUD, all kinds of federal programs. ARPA is one of them as well. They all have UGs now. ARPA has its own special UGs. For instance, the biggest distinction being document retention. For instance, it's normally 3 years for federal funds under the UG. For ARPA, it's 5. So there's small little variations in terms of the UG guidelines, but that's why we put the link in there. And we will, next steps after we send out these documents, hopefully we'll be able to have the city's policy on ARPA funding posted soon, but it'll definitely be with your contract and it'll be referencing your contract. And then your contract would be the next step. Once we realize who's streamlined for funding, we'll get the contracts out and the policy so that your organization can adopt those policies.
Thanks, Carlos. I'm gonna go to Mr. Darity. Did we clarify that for you?
Yes, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Ms. Jackson?
Hi, thank you. And I apologize, I came on a bit late, so you may have already said some of this information. We initially qualified for funding on the city side, but it got deferred to county to be fund. The name of our project is It Takes a Village. And, since we applied over a year ago, we're now working with a fiscal sponsor to support managing the financial aspect of the project with us. And I wasn't sure if that means we need to reapply because it wasn't necessarily, been approved for city funds. And I haven't heard anything about the county, but what are the next steps? And is there anything that we need to send to kind of update where we are as an organization and who we're working with in regards to that?
You do not need to send anything to the city at this time.
Okay.
And the county's, yeah, the county's RFP will kick off on the 5th of July. And our process will have more detailed information requested that is consistent with our typical nonprofit application process. And so all of that information will be available on the 5th. We will send that list, and we will send the link to the information to everyone that applied, as well as I will coordinate with the city and see if there are other stakeholders that would like to get the information. So stay tuned.
So Ms. Hager, if we were listed as funded, do we still have to reapply for funding?
Yes, ma'am. We have a more targeted RFP. And for those of you that have gone through the county's process, you know, there are some criteria that we have that are standard for our risk factors. So we will have that baseline plus incorporate others that are requirements with the ARPA guidelines. The good part about this process is that we'll be able to move a little bit more quickly through things as we negotiate the review and final applications. So, but yes, ma'am, you will have to reapply.
Okay, and then my last question is, because our initial process dealt with public health, COVID, as it was mentioned by the city, but it was also an economic development component to it. So do we need to separate that? Like, do we need to reapply for city funding as well as county funding, even though we were told that we qualified initially for funding? I'm just trying to get a sense of like,
sure.
What to do next.
Okay, so our jurisdictions have different approaches in how they move forward with ARPA funding. Some have broad requests for proposals, and then there are situations where there are more targeted categories. And so for the county, we have targeted categories, and so based on that particular scope that we're trying to address that aligns with our strategic plan, we're asking proposals to align in that way. Now, if it delves into other areas, if it's deemed that it's can blend into what's desired, I would definitely say submit it, but I would encourage applicants to apply based on the actual request that's being asked.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. I'm gonna jump back over to the chat box. Terry Billy, my organization was not funded in this round, but we were invited to reapply. When we do that, and do we need to, when do we do that? And do we need to complete these forms? What's the name of your organization, Mr. Terry? This is Terry.
Hi, this is Terry again. You already answered my question above.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Kara?
Yes.
Did we answer your question already?
I think so. So we are on my project is supporting expanding childcare. And I work with CCSA. So we're on the list for joint consideration with city and county. I assume that means that we don't need to fill out the risk assessment and the other form right now until we hear differently or apply with county.
I would contact you guys if you have to do that. If you guys selected to move forward the next process.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay. I'm gonna jump back into the hands up. Connor, I'm sorry. I know you've been waiting for a while. I apologize.
Oh, great. Hey, y'all. My name is Connor Kirk Farmer. I represent Student U, and our project is called the Pearson Project, which is for renovating a kitchen here at the W.G. Pearson Center. My question is about, one, I'd love to better understand how long do you think the contracting process would be, and how much back and forth there would be between the city and us, and what kind of expertise might be required for that process. And then my second question is this funding going to be forward funded or reimbursement based? And I would love to get a sense of what the process of actually receiving funds looks like and what documentation will be required for that.
So Connor, specifically to answer your question, each organization will be, the contracts will be negotiated on case-by-case basis. So we can't tell you that today. When we sit down and talk about, your scope of work, your deliverables, your reporting requirements, and when the funding is needed, it will be on a case-by-case basis. Each contract will be negotiated individually.
I will weigh in also. For the county, it will be very similar. We do recognize cash flow issues that arise, and there are situations where we do forward funding and quarterly reconciliations, but we do recognize, especially since many of us have been in the nonprofit world, the challenge at times with that and trying not to put any of you in a stressful situation. But again, part of that risk assessment will determine how do we manage that.
Thank you.
And I think, Connor, you asked about expertise. I don't think that you would need any special expertise if you received grants before, because we're here to assist. Carlos and Simeon and our team, we have another team member coming on to assist you all. So I don't think you need any specific expertise that you need to go out and find.
Thank you. And then could I hear from the city too about the reimbursement versus forward funded? Thanks for the county weighing in.
Yes. As I said, each contract will be negotiated individually. Most of our nonprofit organization contracts do include a certain amount at different intervals. Maybe at signing of the contract, at each quarterly with invoices. So we negotiate those individually. We don't usually ask our organizations to wait a significant amount of time before receiving a portion of their funding.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Ms. Kim, go ahead. I'll search through. Go ahead, Ms. Kim.
Yep. So my question goes back to the audits. We do audits every 2 to 3 years, not every year, and we do get federal funding. And so my question is, if the audit is required, would it be going forward with the funding that we would hopefully get, or do we need to quickly do the past year audit to be able to qualify for the funding? So really, is the audit for what will be funding, will be hopefully funded, and we agree to that, or is it projecting back?
So Carlos was the one who mentioned the audit.
Yeah.
Again, I think as we look at the risk assessment and we look at, working with you individually on the contracts, and we have not created the city policy yet. So we will be creating that policy. She will spell out the requirements.
So the question is, do we, to be able to move forward, would we have to have proof of this past year's audit, or is it for future funding?
No, it's for any federal funding that you'll receive through the ARPA.
So it would be going forward then.
Yes, going forward.
Okay.
Yes, but part of the risk assessment question is about, do you have an audit? So that is part of the risk assessment, but it's not required for you to have an audit to move forward in the process.
Gotcha. I'm cool. Thank you.
And I say that our policy is not developed because we have created some leniency around, financial statements, because they are very expensive, based on the risk assessment when we look at nonprofit organizations and the amount of funding that we provide to those organizations.
Mr. William Darity.
Yes. My question is the following. When we go through the process of applying for the county's RFP, should we submit the proposal that we initially sent to the city, Or should it be modified to take into account the commitment that the city is making, which is going to be less than what we asked for, and will require us to scale back the proposal? So do we need to make an adaptation in the proposal that we send to the county?
So Dr. Darity, I will let Claudia weigh in on that, but I would say that, let you know that all of your applications, the county has access to your applications that you submitted to the city. Because we did not know how we were going to move forward jointly or with separate RFP processes. So they have access to that information, and I'll let Claudia talk about what they may need from you or how you may need to change or adapt your scope and funding amount.
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you, Bertha. Yes, that's a great question. And I'm glad you shared that, Bertha, that all of the commissioners were giving electronic copies and hard copies of all of the proposals that were submitted. So they do have that information and are familiar with those original asks. I would suggest that in looking at the RFP, see this as a whole separate process, because it will be different reviewers. It will be based on staff's recommendations, as well as the committees of internal and external reviewers. And so when we look at it, it will have the evaluation standards that are very similar to the cities. And so I would just make sure that the application is responsive to the RFP, and also it keeps in mind how it will be evaluated. And that would be my advice. And it's fine if you acknowledge that it was one that the council recommended, but I will also say they will have those lists as well.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm gonna jump back over here to the chat box for a second. Miss Anjanette, did we answer your question already?
Hi, yes, my name is Anjanette Miller with the, my proposal is the Center for Youth Entrepreneurship. So maybe I missed it. I was on another meeting and hopped on late, but the process, so we are not on the list for joint consideration, but we are on the list to reapply. So I'm just curious about when is there a process for that? Should we go ahead and start the project eligibility form, risk assessment, or are we waiting to be invited?
And Jeanette, you are Center for Youth Entrepreneurship. You are funded. Your dollar amount is in the yellow column, highlighted column on the form, on the spreadsheet.
So
Okay.
yes, you will have to fill out the eligibility and risk assessment.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Let's get back to Ms. Jackson. You have another question, or?
Yes, I do. Thank you. In regards to the assessment, is this, going to be assessed by like the computer, or this like staff members looking at it? I wasn't sure like what the process was this time around compared to how it was with the first round of assessing eligibility, as well as just kind of reviewing the proposal process.
I will be reaching out to you, your organization, and setting up a one-on-one, and we'll have I'll go over your documents with you. You'll help me fill it out. So it'll be a one-on-one basis with every organization here, either myself or my new team member that we're hiring soon. So I will reach out to each one of you individually to kind of just go over your documents to make sure that everything, all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted.
I appreciate that. That's good to hear. And then just the other thing, I just think for a lot of the organizations who've kind of been, depending on feedback and communication in this process, just how is overall equity, particularly a priority for organizations who traditionally have not received funding on the, federal side, a priority? Because I know when this was initially presented to us, folks told us to dream big. And so folks dream big. We put our proposals together and like communication just slumped. And then it just became very overwhelming for a lot of groups. And not only just my own group, but other groups that we work with within the city and in the county. And so just making sure that, you know, for groups who have small capacity, what is the priority so that we can just kind of, as a community, just let people know like what's going on, and that there are situations in which you just suggested in which you are going to reach out to people and let them know that there will be more interaction so people can learn and engage in this process.
Well, I can say for one thing that once we get past this orientation, I will be reaching out. I would have one-on-ones with people. I would also be setting up office hours for anyone who has questions and answers during this process. It's a process that it's new to everyone, so there are going to be some bumps and bruises, but we will get through this. We just want to make sure that we do it the correct way the first time. We don't want to have to repay any money. That's the thing. We don't want to have the city to have to repay any money or any organizations that's involved in this process.
So Lee, I would also add that, you know, we are pushing everyone to our website. We also set up the ARP email address, and we've been managing that email address and responding when we receive emails. We set up the website, and every time there was a discussion at a city council meeting, we put the YouTube video so that folks could watch the actual council meeting. We presented our recommendations to the city council in December. They made their decision on May 18th. So there was nothing for us to share other than we were sharing on the website. This is when the city council is going to talk about this topic again. So we tried to be communicative in terms of making sure that we were responding to the emails that came in through the ARPA email, as well as keeping our website updated. And then the emails, we would always say, go to the website for the most recent information. So there was nothing that happened between December and May. We were just waiting on city council to hold a special meeting to make the final decisions.
I understand it. Thank you for this information.
You're welcome. I'll go to the next hand. It's Eden Clay.
Yes, good morning. I'm Ellen McClay with the YMCA of the Triangle. Simeon, thank you for calling me last Friday and introducing yourself, and appreciate this time today to learn from you all. Thank you for your thoroughness. We are, the YMCA of the Triangle is listed in the bottom section as a to defer for the joint city county consideration to fund. And I just wanted to clarify, would it be helpful for us to go ahead and complete the two documents you discussed today, the eligibility tables form and the risk assessment for the organization, just to go ahead and be positioned for when we're considered for funding by the city county group?
I mean, I mean, if you submit those documents, we'll put them in your folder, but we don't have the capacity to process those at this time because we need to process the ones that are already approved. But we're getting documents from organizations all the time, and we're filing those in their folder. So if you have something to send us, we don't have the capacity to have a one-on-one with you to walk you through the documents. So I would suggest not doing that. But again, anything you send to us, we will put in your files. We just don't have the capacity to have a meeting with you to discuss the documents until after we finish with this group.
I understand. And you may have mentioned a projected time frame for when those on the second tier, if you will, but I missed it if you did say a time frame, a projected time frame.
I did not say a time frame.
Okay.
Once we get through this process, we really, we have your applications. It would really most likely be after the county finishes their process where we can talk about where there's synergy among proposals that we both deem as a priority and we want to support. So it would be after that process, unless, as Carlos mentioned, when we finish our process and if we have additional resources left out where, you know, some of the organizations don't get the full amount, we could go back to council and say, okay, we have, you know, 2 million or 3 million that we weren't able to allocate in the first round. Would you want us to look at some of these joint city county ones and prioritize those with that additional funding? I would say it would probably be really difficult to get consensus on that because most of the council members feel that we should do those in conjunction with the county.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. I have back to the chat box, Isabel and Nick. Did we answer your question about the priorities, 8 priorities?
Yeah, thanks so much, Simeon. I just found on the county website the agenda for Monday night's meeting, and what Ms. Hager was talking about the priorities are listed there if anyone's interested in checking it out on page 17 and 18. And I just want to say to Ms. Hager that I really appreciate your candor and positive energy in what I know has been a process of federal funds are fabulous and wonderful and very complicated and bureaucratic and administratively burdensome to monitor. So to the folks in the city and the folks in the county, pardon me, I know this has been a pain, but we on the ground are trying to make our city and our county a better place for our families and kids. So thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Sherry DeVries, did we answer your question or?
No, my question in the chat is, what is the due date for the RFP with the county?
The due date will be August the 15th.
Thank you.
Dr. Darity, do you have another question? Your hand is still up. Or did we answer your question?
No, I don't have another question. I just didn't take my hand down by accident.
Okay. Anyone else?
Any questions that I didn't reach in the chat or didn't? If no one else has any more questions, again, I'd like to thank everyone for attending. Again, just work with us, bear with us. We're all new to this. Like I said, we're trying to get it right the first time. We really want to try to get the money out as soon as possible. It's not benefiting us. We want to get the money out to the organization so you can do what's right for the community. Just reach out. Always check the web pages for the updates. I try to update it as fast as possible when I have new information to put out. My contact information is on the web page as well. I have already reached out to some of you one-on-one. I try to respond to emails as fast as possible, but we are a small team right now. We're building. We're trying to get things correct and be transparent at the same time. But we want to make sure that you guys understand that we are here to help you and we are a team. Feel free to reach out anytime.
Thank you. I was just going to say thank you, Simeon. Simeon has just taken over this project in April. We had Leila Pedersen before, and so he's picked up and it's really a one-man show on our side. And Carlos has stepped in for the city attorney's office. We've gotten a lot of his time working on the risk assessment applications. He's been going to seminars at the School of Government and other places trying to make sure that he can help us from, the understanding the forms and the legal risks and challenges. And Simeon's done the same. So I want to thank them for doing a lot of work with this, but it is just a small team. So we really appreciate it and responding to all the emails and trying to get up with all the federal regulations and setting up our systems and setting up, ways to capture the data. And now we got to negotiate each individual contract now. These forms, as well as each individual contract, has to go to City Council for approval, which means that's a full agenda package. So there's a lot of work to be done. So as Simeon said, bear with us.
Again, I would like to thank Ms. Claudia Hager for joining.
Yes,
us
Claudia.
It's greatly appreciated. Shayla was on. I think she's part of the financial side of our team. I'd like to thank her for joining this morning. Again, just please review the documents once I send it out. If you have any questions, just let me know.
Thank you.
You guys have a
Simeon,
wonderful weekend.
you're gonna regret those words. So, watch that inbox. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Right.